All right, we are in lesson 5. I think we'll have 12 of these in total. So lesson 5, the philosophy of mind, review Cornelius Van Til, his 3-step apologetic approach. So what was that again? Tammy, what was that? Oh, that's right, you weren't here. Oh.
And I didn't listen yet.
Oh, wow. Church discipline for you. Cornelius Van Til's 3-step apologetic approach. The first step was what? Do you have last week's notes in front of you? Yeah? Cheating? What do you do? So you hear somebody make a statement. All right. So I'm going to tell you an example you haven't heard before. You walk into a kitchen and you see a cake sitting on the table. There. Now, what's the 3 steps? First of all, that's decaf there. Huh?
You have a starting point. You have presuppositions.
Yes, you do.
Evidence.
But what's the step of the method? What do you do? When you walk in and you see that cake sitting on the table, you do what?
Observe.
Yeah, you're looking at it.
Question where it came from.
So what is necessary in order for that cake to exist on the table as it does?
Somebody had to put it here.
So now you know what is necessary for, and then fill in the blank. So you can do this for anything. What is necessary for this sheet of paper to have the information on it as it does?
Keep it in your hand.
Not necessarily. The information would still stay there. What's necessary for this church building to exist? So you need the designer. You see where this is going? What's necessary and to pour a driveway full of concrete? What is needed other than Ward himself? So the first step is what is necessary. What's the second step?
Who caused it? What's the cause?
No, what we're doing in the second step is, so if you see that cake on the table, so we have what? We have our belief, which is, what is our belief? What do we believe?
Someone made the cake.
Someone or God? God, right? We believe God made the cake. Not the cake, but if we're looking at the world,
Yeah.
God made the world, right? So either we have a creator, or what's the other option?
Go out and buy it.
Somebody had to make it to buy it.
It spontaneously appeared.
Yeah, or that's another one, but it would follow through it, naturalism. Natural processes meaning what? It made itself. It just came into existence by itself. Those are your 2 options. So the second one is, okay, so what's necessary for that cake to be on the table? You need somebody to make it. You need the ingredients. You need the oven. You need this. You need that. The millions of things that are necessary. And the second thing now is, okay, so if this is true, what you are doing is you are critiquing the opposition's belief. So if the opposition would say what? That cake, either it's spontaneously generated, which scientifically can't be verified, or it evolved by natural processes over millions of years, or however much period of time you want, and now it's sitting on the table. So it came together by itself. So now what you are going to do is demonstrate in step 2 on how that's impossible. How would you tell somebody who believes that cake came together by natural processes, how would you refute that?
Something can't come from nothing.
Yeah, but we're not looking at it coming into existence. We're looking at it, how it formed and came together.
You're critiquing their presumptions.
Right, so how would you do that? Now you're going to do that. You're going to walk up to somebody and say, this cake could not have come together by natural processes because...
Someone had to make it.
There's order.
There's no eggshells in the cake.
Right, so there's order, there's design, there's intention, there is purpose, there's intelligence, because The egg and the flour and the mix can't just come together without a creator. So what you're doing is you are critiquing the other person's position and showing how their position can't hold up. It can't provide the necessary requirements for that cake to be on the table. So then what's the third step?
You demonstrate the necessity of God.
Right. What you're doing in the third step is you're showing how Christianity itself, the biblical worldview, is not only the only one that has the answers for the question, but it's intelligible. So people are like, well, you can't prove that it's God. Well, that's not what we're necessarily doing right now. What we're showing is how the Christian faith can give the what is necessary, the preconditions for that cake. So you need a creator, you need a designer, you need intelligence. Now this might sound common sense, but next week I'll ask this question and we'll see how many people can remember this. Because it's, for some reason, when you push the ball, oh yeah, now I know. But when you're discussing with somebody, you're not going to have somebody there to jog your memory. These things are going to have to be on the tip of your tongue. What is necessary? Show how theirs can't fulfill it. And the third one is show how the biblical worldview is not only intelligible, but also we're using abductive logic, which is what again?
Well, it's somewhat the combination of both inductive and deductive, kind of bringing them together, only taking one, I think, or a few elements.
Yeah, okay, so what you're doing is you're looking at all the options and you're choosing the most reasonable, the most rational, the most intelligible option. So if we have natural processes and we have a creator, well, that cake on the table, abductive logic, it's pretty simple that somebody created it. Now take that cake, now go to the universe. Same principles apply. What is necessary in order for the universe to exist as it does? Show how natural processes and evolution and the Big Bang are insufficient to answer the problem, and show why the Christian worldview is not only intelligible by abductive logic through the impossibility of the contrary, that's the key phrase that we use here, showing how Christianity is the only one that meets the necessary requirements from step one. It's really an easy process. Don't get confused by the words, just think, okay, what's necessary, why is the other person's not true, and show how ours is the only one that can be true through abductive logic. Make sense? So next, what is necessary for a scientist to make conclusions from the experiments that they conduct? So in other words, what is necessary for the laboratory to exist? What is necessary for the scientific method to even exist? What is necessary for a scientist to conduct experiments?
Intelligence?
Yep, intelligence. What else?
They must have a lab.
Okay, so the equipment.
Natural laws.
So the laws that govern matter and energy and the interaction between them. So you have scientific laws like gravity, those types of things. Matter, something has to exist, material.
Actual evidence.
That will result from the scientific experiment. See, this is where, if you can do step one, the other two follow pretty simple. Because if you're looking at everything that is necessary in order for a scientific experiment to take place, intelligence, matter, purpose, intellect, matter, the laws of logic, the laws of nature, now you step back and you ask yourself, well, where does that come from? The atheist will say, I don't know, it just is here. The Christian will say, a creator. Which one, internal critique of their system, do you see where this is going? Do you see how easy it is now to take what is necessary and now which one is it? Natural processes or the Christian worldview? So the mind has to be able to think, abstract, reason, form thoughts, analyze, make conclusions. The capacity to think requires what? Oh, it's right here. I got it right behind me. I already wrote it down. The capacity to think requires a mind. What does philosophical naturalism believe about the mind? What do atheists believe about the mind?
It's physical.
Which means what?
They evolved.
Evolved.
Just chemical reactions.
So if everything is matter, then our brain and our thoughts has to be just physical chemical reaction, which means we really don't have a soul. We don't have a soul. Religion is taught that we have a soul. Science can't prove that you have a soul. Everything is matter. Therefore, your thoughts are nothing more than chemical reactions. So there is no you within inside of you. You just think there is.
Ben,
Yeah.
is there any argument that you can give for why it's bad to kill somebody?
Right. So that'd be the moral argument, and you're going into moral absolutes and relativism. That's a whole other field. Yeah. So they don't have a basis for that either. No. If you're going down this path, you don't have a foundation for morality. So the philosophy of scientism holds to all things consisting of matter. Remember, we're talking about scientism now, which is based upon materialism or natural processes, that nothing that exists is immaterial. Everything is matter. So if everything is matter, human beings don't have a soul. So then how do we think? Well, it's nothing more than chemical reactions in our brain based upon past experiences and our environment that we grew up in. So then how does scientism, materialism, or atheism, we're in the same category here, account for the mind? Answer, it's biological determinism. So atheism will hold to biological determinism, which is nothing more than the chemical reactions in our brain producing what they produce. But if we're going to take a step back now and take a look at the Christian worldview, how do we think? So here's the process of thought on the board. Have you ever thought about how we think and the steps of how we think and how we conclude? We don't really think this through because we just function like this. It's just natural. It's just self-evident. We don't even question it. But we have to start and think through each one of these steps because this is what all of the other philosophies are doing. They're thinking through each one of these steps, but they're pointing it in a different direction. So we have to be aware of each step in our thought process and defining each step in the Christian worldview. So the process of thought, how do we know anything at all? It starts with sensory experience. So you see it, you touch it, you taste it, you hear it, you smell it. Information comes into our mind through sensory experience. This is where we start. So in order for sensory experience to be valid, it is taking information in from objects that already exist externally. So there is an external world outside of us that exists, and our senses are constantly taking in information from that external world. So our mind is seeing the particular things. Actually, let me rephrase that. Our eyes are taking in information from a particular thing, and our minds are comprehending what it's looking at. Apprehension. So just before I saw Ward taking decaf coffee, my eyes brought that in. My mind was telling me that there's a human essence there, Ward, a particular human being, performing a specific action with intentionality. The intentionality was to take decaf coffee because I'm assuming he doesn't want caffeine. So do you see how the mind is logically, do we just do this naturally? Now this is important because we're going to compare and contrast this to biological determinism. If we're nothing more than just the chemicals in our brain, then is it the chemicals in our brain that are receiving experience, making conclusions, forming judgments? If it's just chemical reactions in our brain, it can notice things, but now we take that information and we're using logical deduction. Logical deduction requires what? A mind. Chemical reactions don't have purpose, don't have intentionality. All it is just information like a robot. Where a human being and a human soul is now taking that information in, apprehending it, forming judgments, and drawing conclusions. For instance, the other day our dog was constantly bugging us. We couldn't figure out why. Well, he was hungry. Well, how did I know he was hungry? Well, my sensory experience, my dog's always bugging me. So I'm seeing him, I'm grasping what's happening, I'm forming a judgment, and I'm making a conclusion. Now, if we're nothing more than just chemical reactions in our mind, all I'm seeing is a dog coming up to me. All I am is a robot. you see how forming the judgment and drawing conclusions takes intentionality, it takes purpose, and it takes a mind. Something chemicals can't do. So if we take a look at where this leads, biological determinism, in the middle of page 1, what we see here is the attempt is to quantify or to measure the qualitative, the personal reason and experience. If everything is matter, according to philosophical naturalism, even our emotions, even our thoughts, have to become material at some point. We have to come up with a materialistic explanation for first-person experience, such as reason, such as experience, such as thought, such as memory. These types of things have to be made material, and this is what they're trying to do. Our thoughts are comprised of chemical reactions in our brains based upon our genetics and our upbringing. Human beings do not have souls. And here's Robert Sapolsky on his quote. He was on, what's this guy's name? I forget. He's a British kid. He's an atheist. He's got about over 1 million followers on YouTube. See, atheism is very popular right now in spite of it losing traction. And on this show, Robert Sapolsky said this: there actually is none whatsoever, referring to free will, when you look at the cumulative ways in which you turned out to be where you are. How and what came before determined that there is none. That's all we are, the outcome of biological environmental of luck that started way back when, upon to a second ago. There is no separate me in there. So what they're saying is there is no real you. All you are is a brain that's functioning on chemicals and genetics and neurological connections. And there is no soul within you. You just think there is. So in other words, you don't have free will. You just think you do. And we all live in that illusion. And this is gaining there's a lot of false theories that are gaining popularity today, but this is one of them. That we're nothing more than the chemical reactions in our mind. So then we have to question now. I remember we had that 3-step. Do I still have it up there? I do. So we have our 3 steps up here. Can it be empirically verified? So science wants empirical evidence. Empirical evidence is something that can be tested and demonstrated in a laboratory. Can it be empirically verified, proven true within a laboratory, that human thought is material?
It's a soul now.
Right. So scientifically, how can we verify that there is a soul within us if it's immaterial? All you can see are the results of what we do, but you can't put it under a microscope and say, okay, there's the soul. It's right under a microscope. So you have to actually go back to the starting point, again, of if we are composed of a soul, and then we have Genesis, I believe it's 2:7, where God breathed into the nostrils of man, and man became a living soul. There's our foundation for why we have a soul, because we're created in the image of God. The breath of life is within us. We are in the image of God. So it goes back to theology, which, if you remember, scientism rejects 2 things. What is that? Theology is one, and what's the second one? Philosophy, because you're dealing with abstract concepts. You're not dealing with something that's tangible in front of you. Do you remember Hume's fork? What were the 2 prongs of Hume's fork? Relations of ideas and matters of fact. So relations of ideas are axiomatic truths that are self-evident. All bachelors are unmarried. Laws of logic, mathematics, things that are self-evident. And the second prong was empirical, that you can test it. So how does Robert Sapolsky know this to be a fact? This is the first question we always want to ask ourselves. Is what he's saying scientific, or is what he's saying a mere belief? So the question we want to ask ourselves is, how can a scientist determine whether or not our thoughts are not immaterial but rather chemical reactions? Is that a scientific fact, or is that a belief? Why is it a belief?
Can't prove it.
So can it be empirically verified in the laboratory that human thought is comprised of pure chemicals? No. So then it shifts from science to what? Philosophy, belief. So now it's one person's belief versus another person's belief. But what they try to do is a lot of these people are ex-scientists. So then they put scientist, as a molecular biologist, PhD, and you see that. And then they make a statement. And then you combine the two together. Oh, a scientist said this, therefore it must be scientific. Do you see how they do that? So it's psychological. There's ways of making people think along a certain path. So it's more of a psychological factor than it is empirical evidence. So now it's one belief versus another belief. So then how do we answer the claim of biological determinism? It's pretty simple. If I gain more knowledge in my head, if I memorize in a set of encyclopedias, is my brain heavier? So if I took my brain before and weighed it and it weighs half an ounce, and I took my brain after memorizing an encyclopedia set, how much does it weigh? Half an ounce. But I have all that information in there now. So my brain should weigh more, right? But it doesn't. Why? Because thoughts and information is immaterial. I should have more chemicals in my head because I have more thoughts. So we can sit back and think, okay, so if I've learned more, my brain should be heavier. Or does it get bigger? Storing more information? No. I think our cell phones, compared to computers 30 years ago, are a lot smaller and almost an infinitely time faster. And so the smaller computers get, the stronger they're getting. So the more information I get in my head, my brain should get bigger, it should get heavier, it doesn't. So then this stuff, information, thoughts are immaterial. So we have ways of verifying and checking whether thoughts are chemical reactions, or going through this process here from sensory experience to conclusion can't be accounted for just by chemical reactions within the head. So that's how we would refute naturalistic processes, is chemical reactions can't do this, and information is immaterial. So the more you store in your head doesn't get any heavier. So now our response is going to be, what is necessary in order for human beings to think and to function as they do, which we see on this board right here. What are the preconditions of intelligibility? What is necessary in order for us as human beings to think, to reason, to deduct, to induct, to do the things that we do? So here's where philosopher Ed Feser gives 3 aspects of the mind that are necessary for mental phenomenon. I'll write them on the board. First one is rationality. Second is consciousness. And third is intentionality. I have them in bold on the paper as we're going to go over and see them. These are the 3 things that are necessary in order for human thought to function as and exist as it does. How does rationality come into existence? How does consciousness or life come into existence? And how does intentionality come into existence from matter? So what we're doing is we're critiquing the naturalistic worldview at every single step. They are experts at trying to turn the tables on us. Now what we're doing is we're critiquing their worldview and turning it back on them. In order for reason and rationality to exist, what needs to exist? A rational, reasonable mind. In order for life to exist, what needs to exist? A life giver. In order for intentionality, will, purpose to exist, what needs to exist? A personal God. All of this shows back to God. Every single one of these. In order for human thought to even exist, there has to be an infinite mind that created us. Why does it have to be infinite? Do you remember the 5 things that God has to be from last week? Infinite is one. For the necessary being to exist, he must have infinite,
all-powerful,
eternal, unchangeable,
Personal.
and what's the 5th?
Immaterial.
So now we have to ask the question of why. Why does God have to be those 5 things? Why does he have to be infinite?
If he had a beginning,
We'll go with that one on the eternal. That'll be the next one. But why does he have to be infinite? Because if he's limited in any way, then that means what? He's dependent upon something else for what he lacks. Eternal, the same thing. If he was created at a specific point, then somebody created him. Unchangeable. Going from potential to actual. If God changes, that means at one moment he wasn't one thing, and now at the next he is. He's something different. That means at one point he lacked, or he only had potential, and the second point he acts. So then he can't be all God at all times. Why does he have to be personal?
Impersonal cannot create personal.
Right. So how do you account for human personality, love, emotion, language, all of those kinds of things? Between the Godhead, Father, Son, and the Holy Spirit, there was an eternal fellowship with them. There always has been. We're looking at it in eternity past from our perspective. But love and relationship comes from an eternal triune God. Immaterial. Why does God have to be immaterial? Because if he was material, he would be located at one place at one time. If he's material, he's composed of parts. Anything that consists of parts needs to be put together, which means somebody had to put together God. So that's why he has to be immaterial, because he's not composed of parts. He's not dependent upon other parts outside of himself. And if he was material, he'd be located at one place at one time. So we have to know these things in our mind for who God is to show and demonstrate that the Christian God is the only rational explanation for why human thought even exists, because you need these 3 aspects in order to think like this. And if we're going back to the ultimate nature and essence of something, what is necessary in order for these 3 aspects to form human thought? You need a necessary being who is those 5. Do you see how we're connecting all of these points together? And the atheist would say what? If you were going to turn the tables on the atheist and say, okay, please explain to me why human beings have these 3 things. What they need to do is reroute who we are, change our essence, change our nature, saying we're nothing more than a random chaotic explosion of chemicals that have come together and produced the thoughts that we have. It's dehumanizing. So they don't have answers for these things. This is where we need to be pushing back. But when the atheist makes the objection and we're standing like, I don't know, we have so much information, so much of a defense at our disposal. If we would learn these concepts and learn how to articulate these concepts back for the people who have been taught, and this has been ingrained in them, how to pull them out of this type of thinking, this is evangelism in the 21st century with people who have grown up in a secular education system. Any questions up to this point before we start to go through these 3 here? So Ed Feser starts out with the first aspect of rationality. Feser defines rationality as our capacity to perform abstract concepts, to put them together in complete thoughts, and to reason logically from one proposition to another. We do this without even thinking. But I would highly suggest that we become conscious of this, because in order to explain why and how we're able to do this screams of a creator with those 5 aspects. Human beings perceive particulars and grasp universal concepts. What does that mean? Human beings look at a specific chair. They look at a dog, a particular dog, or a particular cat. So our sensory experience is taking in the existence of a cat, and our mind is apprehending the nature of what we're seeing. And we're able to draw a conclusion that that's a cat, that's a dog is not a cat is not a dog. See, this is logic and reason working together at all times, but we just take it for granted because it's just self-evident to us. It just comes by nature. From this, we form propositions and we make judgments. So that's rationality. The second aspect is consciousness. Feser defines consciousness as the awareness of one's external environment and internal going-ons that human beings and other animals have. We are aware of our surroundings. We are aware of our emotions and how we feel. Consciousness is associated with the qualitative features of experience, like sound, taste, emotion, anger, fear. Internal, we're feeling these things. That's consciousness. Each person has a first-person subjective perspective. This includes feeling, pain, sadness, hot, cold, color, and pain. These are directly knowable only to the individual. Where science can't get to is this. What science tries to get to is to take these qualitative features and quantify them, to measure them, to say they're nothing more than chemical reactions within us. See how they're trying to take the immaterial and turning it into material? And that's what's been going on for the past 100 years, and that's why you see people like B.F. Skinner and behaviorism and other type of philosophical theories, psychological theories, that we're nothing more than the product of our environment, that which we've been lived, born, and raised in. The problem that comes in with this type of thinking is what happens when somebody who's done a horrendous crime stands before a judge. And you make the defense claim that he's nothing more than the product of his environment or her environment. And you say it's nothing more than the chemical reactions going on within their head as to why they did what they did. What does that do with morality? What does that do with justice? What does that do with human personality and accountability? To sit back and say, okay, that's nothing more than the chemical reactions in my brain. There's really no intentionality behind it. I'm nothing more than a computerized robot. I'm nothing more than a machine. There is no free will. Do you see where this goes? And the atheist, in response to this, will laugh and say, oh, there's plenty of evidence that shows the contrary, throwing out these broad statements that try to redirect our way of thinking in this. But if this is true and determinism is a fact, then how do you arrive at justice? How do you arrive at morals? How do you arrive at personal responsibility if we're nothing more than the products of our environment? So then you get into B.F. Skinner and those type of people. Those philosophies have been popularized. But just common self-evident experience demonstrates to us that that's not so. And what the materialist does to override this is to say, you think you have free will, you live according to those principles, but you really don't. So that's their response to that. And it's just one step down more on the ladder of being dehumanized, which is why I think we're seeing today in our culture such a rise of apathy, such a rise of purposelessness. Why? Now today in the streets, kids don't fight anymore really with their fists. If there's an argument, the gun comes out, bang, they're dead. And it can be over the smallest thing. And it's not just in Grand Rapids, it's nationwide. Kids today really don't have any attachment to anything that's substance. It's just, I'm here, I don't know why, I'm living my life according to the way I want to live, how I feel. The human conscience, it's becoming harder and harder and harder and harder because there isn't any really reason or purpose behind why we're here. And if evolution is true and natural processes are true and morality is relative, it's very easy to see why we're going down that path. Now, the third aspect Phaser gives here, so we have in rationality consciousness, is intentionality. Phaser defines intentionality as the directness or aboutness toward an object that is demonstrated by a mental state. So why are we here this morning?
We want to learn.
Okay, we want to learn, we want to worship, we want to praise, we want to fellowship. We have intention. We're about something. We have intentionality, we have reason, we have purpose to get up and to come here. Human beings have a will and a purpose for doing what they do. When people feel hungry, their intention is to eat. When people think about a particular object, their mind is directed towards it. A difficulty the materialist worldview has is demonstrating how causal processes, such as chemical reactions and neurological paths within our brain, create beliefs, desires, intentions, attitudes, judgments, and conclusions. And there's the problem with biological determinism. How do chemical reactions within your brain create beliefs and desires and intentions and attitudes? When two people are discussing and somebody changes their mind, it's because they've thought through the process and they realize that, yes, I was wrong. I have to correct myself. Chemical reactions don't do that. Chemical reactions just react. There's no intentionality behind it. But we have intentionality, which shows what? We have a will and we have a purpose. Why do human beings have a will? What is necessary in order for human beings to have this type of personality and to have a will? Well, because the necessary being God who created us is personal. So that's why we always go back to who created us and understanding that were created in the image of Yahweh, the necessary being. Causal reactions cannot account for logical deductions. So, for instance, what I mean by this is we'll do the most famous syllogism. All men are mortal, which means they die. Socrates is a man. Therefore what? Socrates is mortal. This is what's known as deductive logic. We do it all the time. We don't even realize it. But if we're just chemicals and we're just thinking processes, there needs to be an aboutness. There needs to be an intention. There needs to be purpose. There needs to be reason. There needs to be structure within our minds that takes the information from point A and brings it to point B, C, D. Apprehension, judgments, and conclusions. This is what we're doing. Only a person can do this. A machine cannot. A robot cannot. And the only reason why we're creating AI today is because we're copying what? Us. We have a template already to create something from. Well, then where did we get this from? Remember the AC/DC song, Who Made Who? You Made You? Or you guys know that song? That's the that's the cosmological argument. Who made who? Who made you? You made you? Or, it's a good song. But they're asking this question. And we have to think, okay, what is necessary for myself to exist as I do? Is it natural processes? No, we have to be created. Okay, so then what God? The Hindu God, the Buddhist God, the God of Islam, the God of Christianity. So now we're getting into comparative religions. And we have to say the biblical God because a necessary being who exhibits those. Buddhism and Hinduism, he's an impersonal God. He's an unknowable God. We need a personal God to account for human personality. So we have connecting points. We have reasons as to show how I am as a human being reflecting the image of God. Therefore, God, the necessary being, must exist. And if God speaks and he's all perfect and he's all knowing and he's all loving, then every single word he ever utters has to be true. The Bible, therefore, is inerrant, infallible, and inspired. See how we're connecting all of these principles. We have a reason for the hope that's within us. But we have to be able to understand who we are as human beings, understand what the opposition believes, critique that, show how their philosophy can't account and answer these type of questions, and then show how the Christian worldview is the only one that can account for each one of these. Questions? We got a minute and a half. Good, so everybody has it. We review next week. You're going to just boom, boom, boom. Art, I'm going to test you. Oh, you'll teach the class next week. All right, all good? All right, let's pray. Father, we thank you for your word and revealing to us who you are. May we grasp you and understand you to the best of our ability and to the best of our knowledge, Lord, knowing that we can have faith that everything that you say is true. And Lord, that the reason for the hope that is within us has been placed in us within the Holy Spirit, the absolute expectation, Lord, of the coming good. So we thank you for your word in your Son's